Once an anti-tank gun fired in World War II, the countdown began. The flash, the dust, the thunderous recoil turned camouflage into a beacon, broadcasting the crew's location to everything that could kill them. Doctrine promised these guns would stop enemy armor, but in practice firing meant exposure, and exposure meant almost certain death. From the first shot, concealment ended, and every assumption about layered defenses collapsed. Why did armies keep sending crews into a job with odds this brutal? The real horror begins with the first shot. Every anti-tank gun on a World War II battlefield carried its own alarm. The instant a crew pulled the trigger, 4 signals erupted at once. The muzzle flash, bright and unmistakable, cut through fog, dusk, or even rain. A rolling cloud of dust and debris shot up from the earth, marking the gun's exact position for anyone watching. Recoil kicked the carriage back, shaking the ground and sending vibrations through the pit. And then, the sound. A sharp, echoing report that traveled for miles, bouncing off hills and buildings, impossible to mask. Each of these markers was a mechanical fact, not a matter of luck or skill. Crews knew their concealment ended the moment the shell left the barrel. The gun's flash could be seen by tank commanders scanning the horizon. Infantry learned to spot the telltale dust plume. Artillery observers watched for the momentary eruption and relayed grid coordinates for immediate counterfire. Even enemy pilots flying overhead could pick out the sudden burst of light and smoke, radioing in the location before circling back for a strike. A Pak-40 or a British 6-pounder did not just announce itself to the nearest tank. It broadcast its position to every enemy unit in range, armor, infantry, artillery, and aircraft. The gunner's hand still gripped the breech. The loader reached for another shell, but the countdown had already started. In training, Doctrine spoke of camouflage and patience. On the battlefield, the mechanical reality was simple. Fire once, and every advantage vanished. From that moment, the crew's world shrank to the pit they occupied, exposed to a chain of threats that would not stop until the position was silent or gone. Armies between the wars faced a simple equation. Tanks were expensive, anti-tank guns were cheap. Military planners in France, Germany, Britain, and the Soviet Union reached the same solution. Mass-produce small static guns and scatter them in layers across the battlefield. The French 25mm Hotchkiss, for example, cost a fraction of a single tank and could be issued by the dozen to every division. Staff papers in the late 1930s calculated how many guns could be lined up per kilometer of front, each one positioned to catch enemy armor in a crossfire. The logic was mechanical and cold. Infantry would hold the line, machine guns would cut down supporting troops, and anti-tank guns would finish off isolated vehicles. Manuals described belts of guns, forward ambushes, midfield support, and rear reserves. Each layer was designed to absorb and break a tank assault. The plan depended on numbers, and numbers were the promise. Doctrine promised that no matter how many tanks broke through, enough guns would survive in depth to halt the attack. The German Pak-35-36, the British 2-pounder, and the Soviet 45mm all followed this pattern. Guns were light enough to be towed by horses or trucks, cheap enough to arm whole regiments, and simple enough for rapid training. The assumption was that tanks would move slowly, infantry would anchor the defense, and artillery would provide cover. In theory, the exposure of the guns was a price worth paying for their numbers. The assumption held the design together. Institutional logic accepted that some crews would be lost, but believed the system would hold. Manuals did not dwell on what happened when support vanished, or when tanks moved faster than any doctrine allowed. The focus stayed on the numbers. How many guns per kilometer? How many shells per tank? Not on the fate of the men behind the shields. The result was a battlefield lined with static weapons, each one a promise of control that would unravel the moment the war refused to follow the plan. The anti-tank gun's greatest weakness was its own mass. A Pak-40 weighed nearly 1,500 kilograms, too much for a crew to shift once dug in. Even lighter models like the Soviet 45mm or the American M337mm demanded several men just to pivot the carriage. In theory, horses or trucks could tow these weapons, but under fire, those options vanished. The moment the front began to move, the gun became an anchor. Carriages bit into mud and sand, trails wedged against rubble, and every shot made the ground around the pit less stable. Crews learned quickly that a well-placed gun was only safe until the battle lines shifted. When tanks advanced at 30 to 40 kilometers per hour, the guns could not keep up. Withdrawal became a race that crews almost never won. Setting up an anti-tank gun was labor measured in minutes, but breaking it down under pressure took far longer. Ammunition boxes, gun shields, and dug-in wheels turned a weapon into a trap. A six-man team might try to drag a Pak-38 out of its pit, only to find the trails locked by roots or the wheels half buried by recoil. If a retreat order came, the only choices were to abandon the gun or die trying to move it. The battlefield did not wait for careful planning. Armor bypassed static lines, infantry cut off escape routes, and artillery zeroed in on any sign of movement. Doctrine promised that support would hold the flanks and cover the withdrawal. In practice, anti-tank crews watched their options shrink with every passing minute. The gun's strength, its power, and accuracy became a liability the moment the enemy closed in. The world around the pit narrowed to a few meters of earth, and every direction seemed to lead to the same dead end. Immobility was not just a tactical flaw, it was a sentence. Once trapped, the crew's fate depended on how long the enemy took to finish the job. Once an anti-tank gun revealed itself, the next wave closed in on foot. Tanks drew the first shot, but infantry finished the job. In Normandy, American battalions learned this sequence by blood. Concealment ended with the first flash. German panzer grenadiers would fan out, using the smoke and chaos as cover. They moved fast, hugging hedgerows or crawling through wheat, rifles, and grenades at the ready. The gun crew, stuck behind a steel shield, had little more than pistols or carbines for defense. Doctrine promised protection. The map did not provide. September 1944. Records from a US anti-tank battalion show the cost. The unit entered Normandy with 18 guns. By mid-September 1944, only 11 remained. 23 crewmen were killed and 16 were wounded. Reports blamed Doctrine. Guns were ordered to hold fire until tanks came close, guaranteeing that enemy infantry would be within striking distance too. When a Panther appeared at 300 yards, the crew had seconds to load and fire. Seconds were the difference between a shot and a death sentence. If the gun survived the tank's attention, German infantry swept in behind, using machine pistols and grenades to clear the pit. Survivors scrambled for ditches or hedgerows, but most died at their posts. Crews rarely had time to reload, much less escape. Clear fields and hedgerows offered no sanctuary. Corporal Mike Stevens' team lasted less than a minute. Their gun shield took a direct hit from a Panther's main gun after the first shot. Stevens and his loader died instantly. Another crew watched from a nearby ridge, managed to fire twice before German infantry closed in. 4 men were killed where they stood. The 5th was thrown clear by the blast, wounded but alive. The battalion's after-action summary called these losses inevitable under current doctrine. Inevitable described the pattern of orders and outcomes. Infantry squads were trained to hunt the living, not just silence the weapon. Manuals emphasized grenades over small arms, teaching men to lob explosives behind the shield or into dugouts. The gun was a target, but the men were the mission. Once the tank passed, the real hunt began. Artillery crews did not need to see their targets to destroy them. Once an anti-tank gun fired, its position was broadcast across the battlefield, an eruption of light and dust, and a sound that carried far beyond rifles. Enemy observers trained to spot the briefest flash worked in pairs, using field telephones or radios. Their job was mechanical: note the location, plot a grid reference, and relay the coordinates up the chain. The gun's fate was no longer in the hands of its crew. Counter-battery fire did not require a direct line of sight. A single flash was enough. Within minutes, a barrage could walk in from miles away. German Nebelwerfer teams and Soviet Katyusha batteries specialized in area saturation, firing dozens of rockets or shells in overlapping patterns. Their salvos were designed not to hit a precise point, but to erase everything inside a marked square. The process was cold and methodical: observer to battery, battery to gun pit to silence. The anti-tank crew had no warning. The first shell might fall short, then the next would land closer. There was no time to run. Every escape route already plotted. The pit that stopped small arms became a trap when high explosives rained down. Shrapnel tore through gun shields and earthworks. The weight of the gun, once an asset, now pinned the crew in place. Even if the gun survived, the men rarely did. Artillery did not care if the gun fired again. The act of firing once had been enough. Silence offered no safety. The last known position remained a target until the barrage ended or the grid was declared clear. Reports from Kursk and Normandy describe entire lines of anti-tank guns wiped out by coordinated rocket and shell fire. Their crews found slumped behind twisted shields. The logic was absolute. A gun that revealed itself became a gun that would be hunted, not just by tanks or infantry, but by the invisible reach of artillery. No matter how well crews concealed their positions, the grid reference outlived their camouflage. The battlefield became a map of threats, each flash another entry in the artillery ledger. Once the gun fired, concealment ended. Survival depended on not being seen, not on surviving the shot. Aircraft turned the battlefield into a hunting ground with no shelter. P-47 Thunderbolts, Il-2 Sturmovix, and Typhoons circled above, searching for the telltale scars of an anti-tank gun pit. Open emplacements, once hidden by camouflage nets or hedgerows, became easy targets from the sky. The moment a gun fired, its position was logged by pilots or spotters, and the coordinates relayed for attack runs. Even guns dug deep into bocage or behind tree lines stood little chance against pilots trained to recognize the flash and dust of a shot. Ground attack missions did not discriminate between front and rear. Anti-tank guns held in reserve or placed behind the main line drew the same attention as those at the front. Rockets, bombs, and heavy machine gun fire swept the earth, destroying gun shields and eliminating anyone who moved. Reports from Normandy and the Eastern Front describe crews caught in their pits, unable to flee before a rocket strike or a strafing pass. The gun's steel shield, designed to stop rifle bullets, offered no protection against cannon shells or high-explosive rockets. The logic was simple and ruthless. Guns could be replaced. Trained crews were irreplaceable. Doctrines across armies began to value killing the men, not just the weapon. A destroyed gun could be swapped out within days. A lost crew, especially one with experience, could not be replaced fast enough to keep pace with losses. Aircraft became the final answer to stubborn gun lines. Where tanks and infantry might be delayed, air power erased the position entirely, leaving nothing for the enemy to recover. The trap was complete. Once an anti-tank gun revealed itself, Every layer of the enemy's arsenal closed in, from tanks and infantry on the ground to artillery and finally the sky above. Survival was never about holding out or fighting back. It was about avoiding detection for as long as possible, knowing that the next pass overhead could be the last. For anti-tank crews, the sky itself became the enemy, one that never stopped searching and never ran out of ammunition. Estimates suggest that by the late years of World War II, anti-tank gun crews suffered casualty rates between 50 and 80%. The numbers did not change with heroism or skill. They reflected a process that repeated itself in every major theatre: Kursk, Normandy, North Africa. Wherever static guns faced modern combined arms, the result was the same. Each time a crew fired, their odds of survival dropped sharply. Reports from regiments and battalions describe gun lines wiped out after a single engagement, sometimes losing entire teams in minutes. Replacements could not keep up. Men sent to fill the gaps were often younger, older, or less trained than those they replaced. The math was absolute. Guns could be replaced by factories, crews could not. The battlefield turned nameless teams into statistics, each percentage point a measure of how quickly the role consumed those assigned to it. The workload for anti-tank crews spiraled as the war dragged on. Early in the conflict, a gun team might fire a handful of shells to knock out a tank or two before being forced to relocate or be overrun. But as armor thickened and enemy tactics improved, the math changed. Crews found themselves loading and firing at a relentless pace, sometimes burning through dozens of rounds in a single engagement. The problem was mechanical and unyielding. More shots meant more time exposed. German 88mm crews, for example, once needed 4,000 shells to down a bomber. By 1944, that number had jumped to 16,000. Every extra minute spent at the gun raised the odds of detection and destruction. The gun's power forced crews to stay put, cycling round after round, while every enemy unit in range zeroed in on their position. The faster they worked, the faster the enemy closed in. By 1944, the logic that once justified static anti-tank guns had collapsed under its own casualty lists. Commanders no longer trusted that a dug-in gun could hold a line or survive the first minutes of contact. They did not try to improve the gun or harden the pit. Instead, they abandoned the role itself. Factories shifted production toward tank destroyers, vehicles built for speed, able to strike and withdraw before enemy fire converged. Infantry units received bazookas, Panzerfausts, and PRTs, weapons a single man could carry and fire from cover. Doctrines that once demanded rows of guns now called for mobility and dispersion. The static, crew-served anti-tank gun became a relic. It was replaced by systems that accepted the battlefield math. Survival depended on movement, not on holding ground. The role faded, but the lesson remained. Exposure was a death sentence, and no doctrine could change that. No doctrine, no innovation ever erased the simple truth. Visibility meant death for anti-tank gun crews. Today, every modern battlefield reflects that lesson. Survivability is engineered, not assumed. Machines may take more of the risk now, but the calculation remains the same. The more a weapon reveals itself, the sooner its operator becomes the target. Some equations, learned in blood, still govern war. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts below.